Thanks for joining us this Monday night. We're just gonna stay here in our usual holding pattern until we get started. I'm gonna give it about like 5 minutes or so, but please feel free to drop your name and where you're joining us from in the chat. Hopefully I won't run into the issue where people can't talk in the chat, but I think I fixed it this time. Yay, okay. So we have folks hopping on in the chat to let us know where they're joining us from. So we have Mary joining us from College Park, Maryland. We have AJ joining us from Wisconsin. Hello, AJ and Mary. Michelle from Spokane. Michelle from Washington as well. We have Lucynthia from Toledo. We have Sarah from NLIHC joining us in DC, and we have Mary from Madison, Rosine from Colorado, Joy Little from Detroit, Michigan, Catherine from Colorado Springs. We have Tam from North Las Vegas, Noëlle Porter also from DC. We have Amber from Missouri, Marnie from San Diego, Celine also from San Diego, Stephen from Columbus, Mississippi. Oh, there's so many of you today. I don't know if I'll be able to. I'm so excited to have so many of you on the call today. We have SJ from Anchorage, Alaska, Gabby, who's also from NLIHC, joining us from Charlotte, Dr. Bambi from Atlanta. We have Marsh Santoro from Oregon, Maria from Rhode Island, and we have John from Lancaster, California, Brenda from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and Shannon Jones from Portland, Oregon. We have Claudia from Michigan. Hello, Claudia. Cool. I'll give it about another minute or so. Feel free to keep dropping where you're joining us from in the chat. We have Heather joining us from Texas. Sarah Hasber from Silver Spring. But now in Virginia because, oh no, not asbestos and piping work. Asbestos are the worst. Hopefully you'll be able to get that sorted through soon, Sarah. I know it's a pain in the butt. We have Michael joining us from Minnesota, Kelly from South Georgia, Esther from California. Hi, Esther. Michael Kane from Massachusetts, Shanze from Plan, welcome. Also, I hope they form a tenants union, Sarah. Cool. Well, I'll go ahead and just get us started now, just because we have a lot to go through, and I want to make sure that we have time to hear everybody's thoughts. But again, thank you again for joining today's Tenant Talk Live, everyone. My name is Sid Betancourt. I'm a housing advocacy organizer with the Coalition, and you're currently joining Tenant Talk Live, where we provide opportunities for renters and tenants to connect with NLIHC and one another, to share best practices and learn how to be more involved in influencing federal housing policies and leading it within their communities. Today's topic will be around just tenant protections and the Tenant Bill of Rights. And we're excited to kind of just have a session where you all get to provide that feedback, and we hope that we can continue to have this conversation even after this Tenant Talk Live. So if we're not able to get to you today, please know that we're gonna continue to have this conversation. So please feel free to give us feedback beyond this conversation. As you can see on the screen, we have a Jamboard. But for the purposes of this webinar, we're not going to share the link with you all right now. We're going to go ahead and just take your feedback and manually put it in ourselves. But please know that this Jamboard will be, at least the content of it will be available to you afterwards too. So feel free to take notes, but you will be able to see it afterwards as well. But today we'll be joined by two policy experts. We'll have NLIHC's very own Sarah Saadian from NLIHC, who's the Senior Vice President of Public Policy and Field Organizing. And we're also joined by Noëlle Porter, who's the Director of Government Affairs for the National Housing Law Project. And they'll provide you context for just like the current political climate, but also like why we're doing this work on tenant protections and opportunities for federal advocacy. But before we get started, I just quickly want to go over our logistics that we cover at the beginning of every session. So as you can see, this session is being recorded and it's going to be uploaded to our YouTube channel later this week. So if there are any folks that weren't able to join today, please feel free to share that link with them afterwards. If you have any questions, feel free to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and we'll save some time towards the end of the call to go through some of those Q&A questions. But please feel free to use the chat to share your thoughts and some of your responses to the Jamboard as well. And then this is just a reminder for NLIHC emails, but you should be receiving one every Friday called The Connection. And the recap from this call will be in that e-blast. So if you're not receiving emails called The Connection from NLIHC, please let me know so that you can get the recap from today's call. And yeah. Hopefully, if time allows, we're going to try to unmute folks today, so please be prepared for that. And yeah, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Sarah and Noëlle now, and yeah, take it away, y'all.
Great. Hi, everybody. It's so nice to be with you. I'm Sarah Saadian. I'm NLIHC's Senior Vice President of Policy and Field Organizing. I wanted to Noëlle and I are reaching out to you today because we are working to put together a platform of tenant protections at the federal level that hopefully we can help coalesce the entire or many organizations at the national level. Sorry. The part of the reason why we're doing this is because, as you know, many of you have been engaged in resident organizing and tenant protections work for a very long time. Most of that conversation has been at the state and local level. Because there's been sort of not as much appetite at the federal level for really expansive tenant protections until now. I think for a lot of members of Congress, the pandemic shed light on just that power imbalance between landlords and renters and how that can put more households at risk of housing instability and, in worst cases, homelessness. And so we wanted to come to you because we want to hear your thoughts, your opinions, your feedback on what should be in a really broad, comprehensive set of renter protections that are needed at the federal level. Our hope is that engaging with you through Tenant Talk, engaging with our tenant cohort, with our resident caucus, hopefully multiple times, we can put together a really comprehensive package. We can work with other national organizations to get on the same page, and we'll be ready for next year. And our hope is that we can pull from this tenant protections package for legislation that might be moving or for regulatory action, administrative action by the Biden-Harris administration. Part of our plan is, like I said, to engage with tenants throughout the process. I wanted to share with you a little bit about what that means. We talked about renter protections at our Erase convening, which included many people with lived experience. We've raised it with our resident caucus of our board of directors. This Tenant Talk Live is another place where we're engaging with tenants. We have a new tenant cohort who we'll be engaging with over as well. We're also planning a policy advisory committee, which is open to any NLIHC member. That'll be on December 6th. We'll share more information with you later. But our hope is that this is not just a one-time event. We want to come back to you. We want to get your feedback now. And we want to bring you back a compilation of all of the things that you focused on. We'll put a lens on it, a political lens, to see what might be possible here. But we want to bring it back to you to get more feedback later on. So with that, one more thing I wanted to mention is that, of course, this is not the first time NLIHC has engaged on renter protections, of course. I want to share in the chat box our list of renter protections that we already call for, just to give you a sense of the types of things that we historically have been engaged on. This includes things like source of income discrimination protections, right to counsel, just cause eviction standards at the federal level, expanding and strengthening and enforcing the Fair Housing Act, increasing access for people who have exiting the criminal legal system, access for people in immigrant households, helping to prevent against abusive practices by landlords, focusing on housing conditions, lots of things. This is just the start of this work, and we're really looking forward to hearing from you to help build this out in a more robust and meaningful way. I'm going to pause there, and I'm going to turn it over to Noëlle, who can add some more details.
Thank you so much, Sarah. A couple of disclaimers. One, I have a young puppy who has many squeaky toys, and that's the only tool I have in my toolbox to keep him busy around 6 p.m. So you might hear some squeaking. Second, I just am distracted because Sarah and I have like the same color, the same hair, the same nails, so I need to put my glasses on. All that said, everything Sarah said and a little bit more. One of the things we realized is that folks were coming to our organizations, NLIHC and NHLP, expressing an interest in a National Tenants Bill of Rights from every corner of the world. The White House has taken a renewed and really dedicated interest in housing issues. The president had housing issues in his platform when he ran. Congress, especially the Senate Banking Committee and Chairman Sherrod Brown, have really started to talk about the need to protect tenants in a very real and statutory or legislative way. HUD is asking us how they can do more. We've heard outreach from people like organizations or agencies like the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, saying tenants are consumers. How can we get involved? Different offices on the Hill have said we want to protect tenants better. There are different pieces of legislation our organizations have endorsed in the past that do a lot of this work. And what we want to do is say all of these people are talking, plus tenants' outcry has become so loud that there are these venues like the Tenant Talks here live. Other, organizations, I'm sure many of you are doing a lot of tenant organizing in your communities, where the outcry is now finally bubbling up to a national level. And we want to channel all of that energy into something that creates a really massive platform of what a fulsome and robust Tenants Bill of Rights would look like, and what that would do legislatively at the federal level, and what that might do in a regulatory process. So as Sid mentioned, and as Sarah has talked about, what we're going to do is kind of open up this conversation in a Jamboard way. For folks who haven't used a Jamboard, you can see the first screen of mine here. We'll use 3 main screens throughout this conversation, and my friends at NLIHC are going to be populating all of the feedback that you all share in the chat or through conversation by adding sticky notes. So if someone from NLIHC could just pop one that says hi, you'll see how your feedback immediately populates to the screen. Awesome. And we can move it around and start to see them pop up on the screen. We can add new ideas. One might say bye. Someone has to end the chat here. And we'll continue this conversation about the application process and how we want to organize these ideas. And I think we're all figuring out how to get some of the stickies to pop up. Bye.
And can you zoom out a little bit too?
Sure. Let's see if I can do that with, oh, that got bigger.
Yeah, that we can see more ideas at once.
Awesome. And so we'll start adding those in yellow stickies so you can see them pop up. And we're going to go through a few different frames today. So I want you guys to think about your thoughts in kind of a chronological process of tenancy, right? But everything is a fair answer here, and brainstorming is a very open process. So we'll start the conversation with the application process. Some examples might be whether or not there's a uniform application available to tenants applying for the federal programs that they can carry from landlord to landlord. Let's say you're in Section 8. Or we might want to eliminate fees in the application process. Things to consider as a tenant who's applying for a new residence. Then we'll move on to a second conversation about the rights during tenancy. Do you have habitability concerns? Are you being harassed? Are there nuisance claim problems that you have? Do you have issues with, adding someone to your lease mid-cycle? Something like that. And then we'll also host a conversation here tonight about eviction prevention and mitigation. So do you have evictions that follow you around on your record? How can we solve that issue? How do we keep folks stably housed when eviction is sort of chasing after them? And what are the different components of protections that would help with that? And so think about this as before tenancy, while you're living in a place and you want to stay there, and sort of after, and what we can do. But as I said, brainstorming is a very open process. So our friends at NLIHC are also going to maintain a 4th Jamboard Jamboard as sort of like a parking lot. And if we're not sure where things are they'll populate on that 4th page. And myself and Sarah will look through some of this and sort it before we share it with the group to show you everything that you've come up with. We won't be editing. We won't be, resolving anything. We'll just be getting it organized. So I'll pause for just a second to see if folks wanted to throw any questions about the process into the chat. But what we'll do is open this up to say, and you'll see my puppy, he's joining the chat. If folks have ideas for how to improve the application process or what protections tenants need in the application process, if you can add those to the chat, and the NLIHC folks are going to start populating them as stickies on our Jamboard, and we can discuss some ideas around that. And Sarah and I will either ask for clarification or talk to you about some of the things that are happening at the federal level as those begin to populate. And we can discuss how we might need to expand on this or any other additions.
So, and I can actually read from the chat box to get started.
Awesome.
I see some suggestions, one from Linda, another similar to, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, I'm sorry, Shanze, about either having a central one application fee for all housing applications or no fees. So that's something that's a good idea. We're hearing from Karen Rhodes, a call for rent control. Catherine Duarte is asking for more transparency about what sort of fees would be applied to renters and putting caps in place to make sure they're not excessive.
Oh, can we expand on that one, Sarah? I would love to hear, so does that mean, and this is a great thing, so are there fees that are applied during your tenancy that it could be more explicit, say in your lease agreement, how those might come up, or are there fees in the application process that are still throwing folks for a loop? I know obviously that application fees are hugely problematic, but are there additional considerations?
Maybe we can unmute Catherine.
I'm gonna get there. I'm so sorry.
Thanks, Sid. No, I appreciate it.
Of course.
And Catherine, I'm putting you on the spot, so you can always type more, and we can keep receiving. No discrimination against vouchers is a great one. And I would add rental assistance of any kind to the source of income sticky.
Catherine, you should be able to unmute now.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi. Yeah, so the transparent fee notices, I hear, so I work for local government. I work the city. I don't work for housing folks. So I hear from our housing providers whom we fund, from the case managers and from, renters, and including friends of mine. There's this feeling and hunch that property managers don't fairly or don't have consistent rules for whom they charge. Sometimes it's a fee for a household, and other times they charge background check fees for every person in the household. So it's inconsistent, unfair, and
discriminatory, maybe.
Yeah, very, very problematic. That we can all guess who they might charge more. So making that clear expectation when you're applying for housing, what all the fees are, and of course, obviously, that they're not excessive. Be great to not have fees, but I know that that might be a non-starter with the housing community.
4-time rent to income ratio. I have never heard that's excess in an insane way. And thank you, Catherine. That was really helpful.
I'm also seeing in the chat box, not charging fees in order to do background checks. Elizabeth is asking for a recording or summary, and yes, we will share resources out afterwards. Thanks for asking, Elizabeth.
I like too, you said no fee for background checks. I think being able to use a universal background check for each landlord you're applying to would also be a great solution.
Shanze is asking, just stopping asking about incarceration history. Is there a
Mhm.
way to ban the box when it comes to applying for housing?
Yeah, there have been some really good initiatives around that. And I think Yale did a study. We might be able to find some research there.
Mhm. Karen Rhodes is pointing out code enforcements of such things as conditions
Yeah.
that of the building that you're living in. I think that would go into the next section on what happens during your tenancy, but that's a great idea.
It's actually really good too, if you think about it for application, right? Sarah, if you know that there have been a number of code enforcements against a building, you might pass on applying.
You know, that's sort of like how they have at restaurants when you have to put up what the score was from your inspector. And if
I
you
love
make
it.
public, I actually think that's a great idea. Shout out to for
That chat.
Karen Rhodes for bringing that up. Yeah, absolutely.
So I recognize that a number of you guys, I think Sarah was telling me that this group has a lot of folks that live in federally subsidized properties. So, and you know, the Section 8 or public housing or PBRA, is there anything specific to federal processes or federally backed tenancies that we're missing here? I think I sometimes can think in terms of private market processes. And so I want to make sure we're not missing any Section 8 specific complaints about, I know you guys talked about source of income, which is really important. We'll give about 1 more minute, maybe. Sarah, do you think that's appropriate on application? Because I think we're probably gonna have a ton to talk about. And again, like I said, these can be parked and sorted to the right board at any time. So keep throwing out your ideas as you think of them.
I just want to point out a couple that I think are really interesting here. One from Carrie Hill saying, have a dashboard that just shows how many people have applied. If 73 people have already applied for an apartment, no need for you to fill out a form and pay the fee. So having some sort of transparency around that, I think is really great.
Yeah, then they're just collecting fees, right? They're just profiting off of applications.
Absolutely. Just cause eviction standards, reasonable deposits and income requirements, giving 24 hours notice before a landlord can come to your home and to the tenant's home. But I think that would be under that next section, but I appreciate that too.
Ooh, I want to add one. What about notice of whether or not your property has any federally backed assistance? So when you apply, you could find out if you live in a LIHTC property.
They should definitely make that out there.
You can tell Sarah and I are really enjoying this and we're really excited about your feedback. So thank you guys so much.
I want to, maybe we can see if there's anybody who wants to unmute themselves and share more.
Please.
I'm not sure what the best way to do that. Sid, what do you think?
I think I just allowed somebody to join.
And do we have a hand raising function? Would that be helpful, Sid?
Yes, we do. I'm trying to invite somebody to speak. Oh, okay. I'll go to the next person. I'm so sorry. I don't know why that's not.
We really appreciate
working. Yes, I
you,
think
Sid.
Esther.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for letting me speak because I've been driving and I haven't really been able to elaborate in the chat. So I wanted to mention maybe some assistance with deposits for people to get in, because you know, we have these income requirements now that these property management companies are eliminating people who even could technically afford the rent, but because they don't make, you know, 3, 4, 5 times the rent in their income, they're being disqualified.
Right.
So, you know, like locally, my city is talking about potentially creating a program to help people with their deposits, and you do it kind of like here's the loan, give it back to us when you move out, and use it somewhere else if you have to move, you know, and some like banking kind of thing, because the deposits are so exorbitant, and if you have the deposit and you could afford the unit, you still get disqualified if you don't make the income requirement, which is, you know, really ridiculous. And I also want to bring attention to you guys. I put it in the chat. The city of San Diego is in a lawsuit right now with Real Page, that's a data collection website that property management companies and global property investment companies have been using for years. And they actually share all data on all renters all across the country. And they rate your, ability to be rented to.
Yeah.
And that's a huge disadvantage, because that's one of the reasons why people are afraid to even complain about anything, because retaliation will blackball you nationally. You'll never be able to find a place to live.
Well, Esther, if it makes you feel any better, last week, the chairman of the banking committee called for Real Page to be investigated by the federal government for practices just like the one you're describing.
Yeah, well, and I've been working with my Congressman Panetta on this for a couple of years, and he's working on a couple of bills that he's introducing that I've talked to him about. And he's actually got a bill out there for a renter income tax credit, which some of you can remember about 3 or 4 years ago, I started talking about.
Awesome.
So we really need to level the playing field a little bit with that Real Page, but also the fact that if renters had $10,000 to move into a place between the deposits and those income requirements and everything, we would be saving money for a home, not continue renting, right?
Great point.
So
thanks, Esther.
Thank you for letting me speak, because I do have to run, and I didn't want to, miss out, but I'm going to watch the video later.
Awesome. Thank you, Esther, so much.
Take care.
Thank you, Esther.
So we can go on to the next Jamboard if we want to. I did want to call out one more because I think it's such a clever idea from Carrie Hill, who says, that we should allow tenants to break their lease if they're offered the ability to move into affordable housing, federally subsidized housing. We
Love
do
it.
this for military, DV. Why not for affordable housing? I agree.
Love
I
it.
think it's a great idea.
That's great. That's really great. I saw a hand up from Janelle. I hope I pronounced that correctly. So what I'll do, I'm going to push us to the next Jamboard, introduce that concept, and then Janelle, maybe you can share with us while folks start populating the chat with some answers to the next page. If you still have something to share. So now we're just going to move the conversation forward a little bit chronologically in the renting process, and what are the rights during tenancy that need to be protected. The things that come to my mind, as I mentioned before, could be habitability concerns, harassment concerns, threats of eviction, illegal lockouts, any of the different things that that might come into your mind. What's happening during tenancy that we need to protect tenants from? And with that, I want to make sure Janelle, if you wanted to share something from the previous Jamboard, we would love to hear it.
All I wanted to say is that I live in I think it's section 42, and I get Social Security, and it's hard for me with being a single woman. My kids is pretty much grown and gone, and rent is getting too hard, and finding a place, period. I don't make the income level. And I don't want to be in the shelters, and I hate the shelters because they're not changing the system, the shelter system. They're just giving them more money. And my thing is, I want to change the shelter system because I believe I have to go there soon.
Sure. Yeah, well, and I know that NLIHC has been hosting a number of conversations with some partners around the homelessness issue as well, and the shelter system. And that is not a conversation we are ignoring. And I really appreciate your feedback so much. And, we're going to do everything we can here to keep you out of that system. Thank you so much for sharing. I would love to hear from whomever added inspection anxiety to this, this Jamboard. If we could get some details on that. That's something I don't know that I've heard about.
Carrie Hill, that's going to be you, and you should be allowed to speak now. If you want to, if you're comfortable.
Almost all the tenant boards that I see, like on different chats and things, almost everyone, that's the number one thing that people fixate around is inspection and being worried about what's going to happen as a result of that inspection. Not having very much notice, not being able to control the time. You regularly would just make an appointment with somebody, but instead they tell you you have to drop everything, you have to be here. It's a white glove inspection, and there's extreme consequences if you can't, and that just puts people under so much stress.
And that's inspection of their unit.
Yes.
Okay, so this is anxiety that comes to the tenant when inspections are sort of announced too quickly and without proper notice, and have high expectations that might not be able to be met.
I think anytime you come home and see a notice on your door, you're going to have
Yeah,
some
that's
sort of
a great
anxiety
point.
because it's just rarely a good thing.
And that's a
Rarely.
really good point. I really appreciate that. That's really helpful. And that's, are those inspections that carry like REAC inspections where they're choosing the tenant's unit? Or have you been hearing about inspections that are internal where they're like threatening eviction if the habitability is not up to snuff inside?
Both, but I would say that it's much more stressful when you already live there and someone's coming into your home,
Okay.
especially during times of COVID. A lot of people aren't having anyone over, especially high risk people. And so
Right.
to have people marching into your home anytime there's a stranger in your home is stressful.
Yeah.
That to have your future tenancy hinging upon that, and to not have any control over, let's say you're a night owl and they schedule it at 8 a.m. or
Okay.
it's on Tuesday and you
yeah.
have doctor appointments that day. You don't have an equal say in everything happening.
That's super helpful. And NLIHC folks, maybe we could make a note there that sounds like it's some of the internal inspections, like for your tenancy, because I think there's probably REAC anxiety is for the owners, and they should be anxious if they're not leaving habitability. Sarah, did you want to read through some that are exciting you?
Yeah, reading through it now, I think similar to that is concerns about harassment and other intrusions by landlords, making sure people have access to the language services that they need, providing your deposit back in full when you move out. Non-renewal of leases, that's something that we've certainly heard a lot more about in recent years, especially during the pandemic when the moratorium was in place. We saw landlords use that as a loophole to get out of those protections. I'm just looking through, making sure that there aren't repercussions for complaining about habitability issues or anything else. That's from Rosine. Sarah Hasmer said that, oh my goodness, a DC property with an applicant from a senior disabled woman with a voucher required her to have a guarantor who makes 5 times the monthly amount, which is just impossible to make. That is outrageous, Sarah. Thanks for sharing that.
I would love to hear from folks who are a part of a tenant organization and or have tried to do tenant organizing and have struggled under some of the options or protections that HUD allows, especially in PBRA or public housing. If there's anyone on the call that wanted to add to the chat or chime in about organizing struggles that they may have. And that can be for, private tenants or Section 8 tenants as well. Has anyone had issues too? I would love to hear issues with challenges to who's on the lease or who belongs on the lease or who's living with you. Any issues about nuisance or, legal system involvement that the landlord is trying to leverage against tenants. Definitely would love to hear about habitability complaints that simply just like go unresponded to. This is all really good stuff that people are adding. Renters insurance company, that's a great, if we have choice, we can, minimize fraud, right?
Yeah, I was gonna say too, we have Nakia too, who has their hand raised if we want.
Oh, please.
Have her speak really quickly. Nakia, you should be able to unmute now. Nakia. It doesn't give me the option to unmute.
It looks like Nikki is trying to connect her other audio. So that looks like that's the issue there.
I have never heard of this idea of clutter control. If someone wanted to expand on that, that might come from another That's something I'm not familiar with.
Carrie should be able to talk now if you want to answer that question, Carrie.
Carrie, is
I've
that in
seen it
line
in,
with some of the inspection issues?
I've seen it in several different housing authorities. Seattle is a big one that comes to mind that has the program where if your inspection doesn't go well, or if you need help, the social worker can send you to a program called clutter control.
Interesting.
Okay.
I think I've heard of similar things when in the homelessness space where if you have challenges keeping your apartment in the condition that it needs to be kept in, that a caseworker will work with people to help them. Maybe it's a matter of not having access to the cleaning materials, or maybe you've never been in an apartment on your own before, and so maybe it's about learning some skills. So I've seen things like that in the homelessness space too that might carry over.
But
Appreciate you.
also being protected from having your tenancy contingent upon
Right.
participation in these courses, or, you know, whatever it is that they think is remedial, that the PHA can't prescribe to you, you know, how. Back. I really appreciate that. Thanks for the clarification, Carrie. That's really helpful.
And then if we have time, we also have Shalonda Rivers with their hand up if we want to unmute them.
Shalonda, it's been ages.
We love Shalonda.
Shalonda or Nakia, if you guys are able to connect.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, we'll probably spend like 3 more pages on this slide. Go for it, Shalonda.
Okay, really
minute.
quick. I'm just going to put when the person spoke about clutter control. That is a great thing that they that they will refer the residents to an agency. But we also have to be careful that it's not, in some states, I believe this is under the fair housing clause, that is if that resident have a disability, and I just put that word in the chat. And I learned that maybe recently about that word, and that is a mental illness that people, mostly seniors have, and sometimes they have clutter. They, you know, it's very cluttered, or what's the other word I'm looking for? Where they don't want to get rid of all of the items.
Right.
So I can't think of the name.
Oh, that's what hoarding is, I think the word you're
yes,
looking
hoarding.
for. But yeah, so they have to
Hoarding.
be
That's it,
protected. Right,
So
100%.
it falls under that category, but I just want to just say that, you know, sometimes, you know, it's a good thing that they send them over to
Right.
a social worker for help, and make sure it just doesn't fall under a violation, because it could fall into fair housing. So I just wanted to say that, and I did put that word in the chat because I took up a training on that, and it was a really great training because I didn't know about it. So thank you.
That's awesome, Shalonda. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, let's move on to the next slide too, if we may.
Just wanted to double check that Nakia wasn't able to connect verbally. So, and you can still speak up if you get a chance to, Nakia. So our final slide is thinking about sort of like moving on, right? And so one would be, how do we keep you stably housed? Eviction prevention. If you're being served notice, if you're being threatened with eviction, what are the different protections we need in that setting? Are there ways in which we can improve the eviction process that would prevent eviction? So something like, for example, a diversion court that doesn't apply any actual eviction to your record, but keeps you out of the eviction court system and diverts you through the system to remediate the problem. And mitigation would be something like expunging the record of someone, or not allowing, somebody had put it on the previous slide, but I think it would actually be a really good protection for here, preventing the use of records of eviction from a national public health emergency. So basically saying you can't be evicted, or the eviction from the public health from the pandemic doesn't follow you on your record. So what's happening sort of after, or as you have to continue to seek new tenancy, that we want to talk about protections here. And I'll mention that NLIHC has been leading a charge, and NHLP has been very involved in a piece of legislation called the Eviction Crisis Act. And one of the things that we talk about a lot is the sort of remediation, the diversionary tactics with the courts. But the other thing is, one of the things we recognize we need here is simply cash. We need to be able to protect tenants who are facing emergency situations where it's a one-time payment to pay the rent, et cetera. And we do not take that lightly. There are a number of different ways in which we're pursuing legislation to that end. But we also want to have protections in place that give tenants the right to work out those situations, right? That give them the effective amount of days, 30-day notice at least for eviction prevention, to pay or quit, the ability to set a payment plan as a protection, all of those different things that need to be involved. Eliminate cash for keys, that's awesome. Legal representation for eviction proceedings is a huge deal. And there are a number of different ways we're trying to pursue that, but there's no substitute for simply saying that folks have the representation that they need.
I'm seeing another great idea from Carrie Hill, who is killing it today, about not automatically moving people to month when their first year of their lease ends. Everyone should have some protections for rent increases and should have a little bit more notice about when or if they might have to move.
Yeah,
So I
absolutely.
think that's really helpful to hear.
Yeah.
And I think maybe some embedded in some of the things that we're hearing is really about the priority needs to be keeping people in their home rather than punishing people or kicking them out if there are issues that arise, really treating people like people, and recognizing that everyone has a right to remain in housing.
Yeah. Do folks have any experience with like one strike procedures or anything they'd want to suggest around protections against one strike evictions? Because I think Sarah's point is a great one. There's a lot contained within this ability to say, like, these are people in homes. And so we're not talking about like the procedure says this, done, but how do we have individualized assessment of situations and real efforts to keep people stably housed? National minimum filing fee. I like that. I'd probably move that one back to the first jam, but that's why it's great to have this open dialogue. HUD tax credit.
Just looking to see if there are other ones.
I can take somebody from the audience too, if that's okay.
Please, Sid.
Let me see. Rachel Johnson, who I think is one of our cohort members. Rachel.
Hi, y'all. Hi, everybody. So yeah, I wanted to add that, like in Florida, and I know that other states, some of their rules and regulations when they go to court to file, and just to be real quick, they have it where the tenant has to answer, correct? But there's no accountability to the landlord. The landlord is able to go and file eviction without any accountability, whether there's any code violations, whether they said that they told the tenant they weren't going to accept their rent, because most times that allows them to go file these evictions. Right. So I think that there should be some form of affidavit for the landlord to confirm that there's no major code violations that prompted this, because they won't remake the repairs. Right. There should, all those different things that you can create. The other thing is there should be mediation and arbitration beforehand, a mandate of a mediation and arbitration before the court document is filed for an eviction. I know that they have it afterwards, but it should come before so we can try to settle it to prevent the eviction going on the person's record. So I really know that's
great points, Rachel. I would be interested oh yeah, go Sarah.
I was gonna say, it makes me think, just earlier today on our national call, we were hearing from researchers who were looking at landlords who were filing 17 times on the same household month after month. And they do it in part because there's a business interest. They can make that, they use it as a tool to pressure the tenant to pay the rent. And they can make money on additional fees, et cetera. So I don't know what the answer is here, but would love to explore more about how do we make eviction not a business model
Right.
that landlords can make money off of? But I think
Yeah,
a lot
and-
of people are hitting on that.
I had never 17. That's insane. I also wanted to add to Rachel's point, and Rachel, by the way, I love your icon, your photo, that mediation, what we've seen in a lot of the data is that mediation is still really beneficial for the landlords. Oftentimes the mediators are hired by the landlords. And so making a note about how we might regulate mediation to ensure that it really is a neutral process, because we know that representation in the courts is one of the problems, where 10% of landlords or tenants have representation, but landlords have 88 to 90%. And so we want to make sure this is a neutral and fair mediation process before we head to court. So just a real regulation of that concept.
And I'm seeing a lot of or some questions about or comments about not being able to read all of the yellow tabs, which we understand. What we're going to do is we're going to pull this information together and we'll share it back to this group. So this is not the only time that you'll see this. So we apologize for it not being, there's a lot of good ideas, which is a good thing. That's why it's so full. But we will make sure that people can have access to the information that they need on this.
Perfect. So Sid, just looking at the time, I wanted to make sure we kind of sent it back to you for overall questions and answers, additional feedback that we can add to the Jamboard, et cetera.
Yeah, I think Dr. Bambi said that she had a comment too, if we wanted to invite her to come on before we do that.
Please.
You should be good to go, Dr. Bambi.
Okay. Yes. Good evening. I'm a former property manager, and I manage properties primarily Class C, project-based Section 8, LIHTC, any other assistance that you can imagine. From 2002 to 2017. And right before I moved to Metro Atlanta, there's a small town in rural Georgia I used to be a part-time property manager for. And their magistrate court judge there, he required certain things before we could even file an eviction. Number one, the person who was going to show up to represent the landlord had to be a full-time employee. So with me being part-time and mostly all the property managers being part-time and having 2 or 3 properties, he was like very strict, like, no, the person has to be a full-time employee. Number two, we had to have documentation where we tried to work out a payment arrangement with the landlord. This was even before you could even file. See, we're talking about mediation after filing. Yeah. But in Ashburn, Georgia, we're talking about those remediation processes before the filing can even take place. So we had to have a letter signed that was signed by the property manager, signed by the renter, stating that we gave them, X amount of days that they could, pay their rent. And the whole time that I was there, I never, ever, ever had an eviction. And all of the payment arrangements that people said, because they set the payment arrangements based on their schedules, they made them. Because the magistrate court judge there in Turner County, Georgia, he put these parameters in place that made it very, very difficult for the landlord to evict somebody. So that's why I just wanted to just kind of make sure that we include those judges, in the conversation.
First of all, everything you just said makes me love a good judge. Bench reform is a whole nother conversation we should have on another day. But it's a key part into how we could regulate this process. You just listed a number of things we could require of landlords before they're allowed to file at the federal level. So I am so thankful for our NLIHC note takers, because those actors that are playing right at the local level can teach us how to regulate this. So thank you, Dr. Bambi. Those are amazing stories. And I love that judge in that small town, which I can only assume is a red county in Georgia. Sid, you're in charge.
So we have about 10 minutes left, and I do want to respect everybody's time. So we might have time for a question or two if anybody wants to ask a question, I invite you to raise your hand now or put it in the Q&A feature. But I did want to kind of circle back, and you kind of just touched on it right now with Dr. Bambi's comment too, just like the enforcement question and what like tenants can do to make sure that their rights are being enforced.
I saw that question a couple of times. That question was asked earlier in the chat, and I think it's really important because we know you can write as many rights as you want, but if you can't enforce it, it doesn't really mean much for people who are at risk of losing their homes. And so I think for each of these, we're gonna have to think through what enforcement looks like so that renters really can take advantage of these protections and hold their landlords accountable. I don't have the answers for all of them yet, but I'm hearing loud and clear from you guys that enforcement has to be a key part of what we're thinking about from the get-go. And I think to some extent we've talked about right to counsel or greater access to legal counsel, but we know that we also want to have other avenues for renters to be able to enforce their rights. We can't just rely on there being enough legal aid attorneys, no matter how awesome they are. We need to have self-executing protections here too. So I really, really appreciate folks raising that, because that's something we'll have to continue to think about. And Noëlle,
Yeah. And I'll add to that a couple of things. So one, public housing residents currently have the right to organize that is protected by the federal government, and there's funding available through your PHA to create a public housing tenant organization. So if you live in public housing and you're not organized, it was something I'd really encourage you to pursue. Look, just doing some research, maybe you're reaching out to NLIHC or NHLP to see how you'd get started, or a community partner. If you are organized, one of the things we're continuously asking the Congress to do is to increase the money that they give to tenant organizations. And then finally, what we're adding to that process is we're starting to work on increasing or adding the right explicitly to organize for Section 8 tenants, and then eventually for private tenants. And so we really want to think about tenant organizing as a tool for holding HUD accountable and holding landlords accountable also, right? Your voices have more power when they come together. So we'll want to expand protections for tenant organizing, but then doing that work on the ground of creating local community organizations is really important, because we have to keep, like I said early, kind of like raising our voices louder and louder, because these oversight issues are egregious and we hear you.
Yeah, and just to underscore how important these are, I'm seeing a question from Amber about, are there rights for those who aren't in government housing? And that's really the big challenge here, is that there are some rights for renters in federally assisted housing, but for the most part, if you're not receiving federal assistance, it's for the most part up to your state and local government to have protections.
Right.
And we know that many state governments prevent local states from enacting their renter protections, or they have very few renter protections in place. And so part of the motivation behind this is because there's more recognition from members of Congress that we have to have a standard level of protections across all jurisdictions for renters. We can't leave some renters to the wolves in southern red states where Bambi isn't there, Dr. Bambi isn't there to help protect them, but protect many people in California or other places, right? We need to make sure everybody is having protections. And so that's part of the motivation behind this.
I've been to Ashburn, Georgia. It's a lovely place. Do we have any more questions, Sid, popping up?
I think Amber Smith just specified that they were talking about unionizing or creating like a tenant union, which I think we've seen a lot kind of pop up across the country too. And I think that's a really powerful way of exercising like your right to organize if you're not in federally subsidized housing. But yeah, there's definitely, I feel like we could get to into a lot of deep conversations too. And I'm sorry that we kind of ran out of time, folks, but I do want to thank both Noëlle and Sarah for joining us tonight and going super in depth with these conversations. And like I said, this isn't going to be the end of it either. So really looking forward to hearing all of y'all's thoughts. But just for the last 5 minutes, I'll go ahead and wrap us up with just a few reminders and a few logistics for you all. So we're gonna hold on, let me go back. I moved a little bit too quickly, but as always, if y'all have any questions or if you would like to provide any suggestions for future Tenant Talk Lives, you can always email me at sbetancourt@nlihc.org. And we'll also be sharing Sarah and Noelle's email in the recap and in the chat too. I don't know if I included that in my list of links to share today, but they should be there. But outside of that, just a few reminders. We are looking for guest authors for our On the Home Front blog on an ongoing basis. So if you would like to share your experience in affordable housing with the system, whatever that might look like, please feel free to reach out to us at outreach@nlihc.org. We do have one that was recently published, I think towards the end of October, talking about rental assistance from one of the folks that attends our Tenant Talk Lives. So feel free to check that out. We'll share that in the chat shortly as well. And then also, please do not forget to join our Facebook page. I'm gonna be working with somebody who does attend these Tenant Talk Lives to hopefully boost our engagement in there. I will admit I'm not the best Facebook person, but I am excited to learn more and engage with you all there. And then the third reminder that I have is Maria Foss, and I'm so sorry if I mispronounced this, but Maria Foss-Canaries from the National Homelessness Law Center is looking for folks who have experience being put in pandemic hotels and then being back on the street or facing encampment suites. If you have experienced that personally, please feel free to reach out to her and share some of your stories. They're going to be doing some work around that soon. So we're going to share Maria's email in the chat. And then last, but certainly not least, I do want to send a reminder from some of our friends at the Partnership for America's Children and the Coalition on Human Needs. We have a little bit under 3 weeks to claim the child tax credit. So if you haven't gotten the child tax credit yet and you qualify for it, please check out the blog post that we'll be posting in the chat as well. And of course, we're going to share that in the recap so you have access to that. We want to make sure that folks take advantage of it while it's still available. But yeah, that's all I have for everyone today. And again, everything that was shared today, the chat, the recording, everything will be sent out this Friday in our connection. And if you're not on it, I'll make sure you're on it, but please feel free to reach out to me if you don't get that email. But thanks again, everybody. Thank you to Noëlle and Sarah, and I hope you all have a wonderful night.